This is Books of Titans, the podcast dedicated to the influences of influencers. The books that have helped shape prominent inventors, business leaders, athletes, intellectuals, scientists, and others. We'll talk about what makes these books such classics and at least attempt to have an intelligent discussion about what makes them so important and influential. Today we're going to talk about the book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, by Haruki Murakami. I really hope I said that right. But in any case, even if I didn't, many apologies to those of you who can handle Japanese, which that is not one of the languages that I've spent any appreciable time with. So sorry for the inevitable mangling that will happen when I touch Japanese. But anyway, this is a book that Erik, you read and was on your list, but not on mine. Partly because it's about running, and yeah, we'll talk about that. But what possessed you to put this book on your list?
Well, I actually put 4 running books on my list this year because I love running so much.
You are a psychopath, my friend.
Oh, running is so joyous in this book. This book captured so much of the joy of running. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Yeah. But no, I mean, in the past, I've read some books that have really challenged me on running and challenged my ideas on running. The first of those was Born to Run. And that was the first time I'd ever read about somebody running a 100-mile race. And I have not done anything close to that, but just this idea of being able to run that distance, it opened me up, I guess, to running longer distances, and something that's even brought greater joy in my running days. And then a book I read a couple of years ago, Living with a Seal by Jesse Itzler, and in that book, Jesse invites a Navy SEAL to live with him for 30 days on the condition that he'll do whatever the SEAL says. And that book also really encouraged me to run. And after reading that book, there was looking at the graph for that year of my running, it was like a line that just went almost straight up after that. So I love reading books about running because I love running. And then also because of the fact that it does give me a lot of motivation to run. And,
sounds like a serious personal problem.
Yeah, an addiction, and this was just the first of the 4 books. So think of how much I'll be running by the end of the year.
I don't even want to imagine it. Like I already, like the lack of pleasure that I take in any sort of distance running, just vicariously, I already feel that in terms of even thinking about what's going to happen to the amount that you'll run in the future. And, of course, now that I also have an Apple Watch and I get updates on your daily runs because we share our activity information, I get to see like, oh, Erik went and ran 7 miles today. Yippee-ki-yay. It's fantastic. I'm just going to stick here with some weights or whatever.
So what don't you like about running?
Well, this podcast, I really don't want to make this episode too long, so I'll just go ahead and pass for the most part on that particular.
But I mean, is it like you don't like how you feel? You don't like how you feel afterwards, or it's boring?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's 3 places to start. Yeah, the other thing is that I play the sports that I played. I mean, running was something that you did as a part of the sport. It's, a training thing, but you just, yeah, well, I mean, punishment. Yeah. If you're running distance or whatever, but I used to be able to run 3 miles all under 6 minutes, back when I was about, 50 pounds lighter. Actually, let me see, 70 pounds lighter. So, that's a different thing altogether. But I remember when it wasn't quite so difficult to do. But I think part of it is that I just don't enjoy the staying kind of at a low throttle the whole time and just plodding. Partly because again I've got some I might be 36 years old, but I've got, my joints are, probably a good 75 years old, given what I've put them through. And that kind of, the kind of pounding that you get when you basically jog or when you do longer runs is not something that I've typically found pleasurable, especially before I had my ankle reconstruction. Anytime I did any sort of longer run, it was like running on glass. It's not so bad, not as bad now as it used to be, but it was like actually when they finally did more imaging after I'd basically begged, like, listen, you have to send me to the to the orthopedic, and then the orthopedic, as opposed to the sports med people, I mean, the story, orthopedic touched my ankle for about 25 seconds and said, you don't have any lateral ligaments left. I don't know what's holding, basically all that's holding your ankle together in this direction is skin. And so then when they, did more imaging, it was like, oh yeah, that's got to be really painful. Given all the bone chips and everything in there, that probably feels like you're running on glass in there. Yeah. So yeah, that becomes unpleasant for a while. And I think a lot of that association's still there. Plus I have asthma. So, the sorts of things that I tend to do, I'll push really hard, on interval stuff, and I'll run hard on short distance stuff, but stuff that basically just tests your breathing it tends to be less fun for me than some other things. Although I'm determining that I do need to do some more distance running as a part of my workout regimen, because that's a current hole in my fitness overall. And unfortunately, that's something I'm just going to have to add in a little bit more. So going longer than 400s and 800 repeats and such that I'll do once in a while. I need to go a little bit longer now. So not real happy with that. But you, on the other hand, you're looking at, how can I find a way to fit a 100-miler in at some point, and set it up so that I get pizzas delivered at increments along the run. I know how you're thinking.
Well, it's funny that topic does come up in this book as well. And Murakami decided to run a 62-mile race. And what's interesting, so this is a guy who runs 36 miles a week. So he runs 6 miles 6 days a week. He always takes one day off. He just kind of figures in a day for rain or some sort of inclement weather or just the busyness of life. So he averages 36 miles a week, and then as that gets closer to races, he'll increase that, and he does one marathon a year. So that's kind of his main race per year. But one year he decided to do a 62 miler, and it had the impact of taking his love of running away, because it was just I
wonder
too much.
Why would, geez.
But some other people, they do 100 milers, and they it makes them want to do more. It makes them want to do 135 miles or some other crazy thing.
I mean, listen, I've ridden some insane distances, or at least what most people I think would consider, very long distances on a bike. But these people are running further than just about any ride I've done. I mean, I can imagine losing the love of running. God. It's trauma.
Yeah. So my running career started in elementary school. I remember we would run laps at around the grassy area, and I don't know that that's the best thing to do, because nobody really enjoyed it, and to build a lifelong love of running, that's probably not the best place to start. But my dad always ran. And so in high school, I got influenced, let's say, by Jean-Claude Van Damme and others to where I was interested in karate. So I took karate, and then I figured I would keep my legs strong by joining the track team. So in middle school, I joined track, and then kept that up through high school, and then did cross country my senior year of high school. And in high school, my event in track was the mile. Had an excellent coach, but I just became really burned out with running, to where in college I didn't run much until the latter 2 years of college. I picked it up again, But my idea of running at that point was just a few miles at a time. So I would go out for a few miles, run pretty hard, come back, and have been in pain the whole time. So didn't really enjoy it.
So basically, the way that I'll generally do my what I consider longer runs, which would be something like a 5K, run it fast, be in pain the whole time, and then come back and be like, well, that was my necessary pain medicine and pain cave for the day. So there we go. Yeah. So that was basically your approach then.
That was my approach until I got married. And then I married this insane woman who would run 8 miles at a time. And I couldn't even wrap my head around that, because I would be bored and then just in tremendous pain for 2.5 miles. So I couldn't imagine running longer. But
Amen.
A few things happened. One is, this is around the time that podcasts started getting popular. So I could download podcasts and then have something to listen to on the runs. And then I was training for a race, and it was actually just a 1 mile race. But I figured if I trained for longer distances, that 1 mile wouldn't seem so long during the race. So I did like a 5 mile race, and then I did, or not race, but just a run, and then 6, and then finally 8 miles. And it shocked me in that I felt better at the end of the race, at the end of running 8 miles, than I did running just 2.5. And I kind of got into a groove around 5 or 6 miles, and just would end feeling great. It was almost like back in high school, I remember when I would push myself to the max on races and stuff, like you would just have what they call, I guess, the runner's high at the end. And I mean, it just felt so good. And it was almost like recapturing that feeling by doing these longer runs. So last year I did my first marathon, did a couple half marathons. And the marathon was a bit much. I enjoy the half marathon distance a little better, but it's really become just a time for me now where I get a lot of my thinking done. Stuff kind of connects that won't connect if I'm sitting in front of a screen. It's a time where I listen to a lot of podcasts and then just kind of let my mind wander, and a way, I guess, to stay in shape, but also just I really enjoy it at this point. Yeah,
well, I mean, these are the sorts of acquired tastes that insanity does require, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting to hear that, because I mean, so much of the first half of that really does mirror sort of the way that I have experienced running and so on, and I've done very little in terms of experimenting with some of those longer distances, but it's interesting to hear that difference, and to hear that, well, I was always in pain at this level, but then once I started doing longer, and I would imagine a bit slower for once.
No, well, and that was the funny thing is I would actually maintain about the same speed for the longer runs. I think it was just like at that 5 mile mark, for some reason, you just kind of push through something, and then flow. I don't know what it is, but you kind of hit stride. And
I wonder if it has anything to do with the 5 stages of death and dying, or of grieving. That you finally reach, your body finally reaches the level of acceptance that well, okay, I guess there's no stopping here, so I'm just going to go ahead and accept it. And maybe at that point it's worked. But who recommended this book? Who else other than you is insane enough not only to want to run so much, but to read about other people running and about the phenomenon of running long distances? What insane person recommended this book?
The insane person was Mark Bittman. And that was on episode 205 of the Tim Ferriss podcast. So he's the only person out of the 300 plus episodes that has recommended the book, but he's the one. So have you heard of him?
I don't remember that episode, so no. I probably should, but I don't remember him.
Yeah. I don't think I heard that episode either. But yeah, he's the one. And it's funny. I mean, I looked at Instagram while I was reading the book, and ton of people reading this book all over the world. And so that was really neat to see. Let's
go ahead and get to talking about the book itself. And what you got out of it. So first thing is, you mentioned that he runs 36 miles a week. He started with he does a marathon a year. He's got different things. Started, you said, with a longer run at an earlier time. But why did he start running? What led him? So this book is what he talks about when he talks about running, which I wonder why you would title a book like this. I mean, is he known for talking about running? I mean, is this what
he's known as a runner? And I'll see if I can find it here. But the title actually comes from another book, so it's kind of a play on. Yeah. The title of this book is taken from the title of a short story collection by a writer beloved to me, Raymond Carver, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. So he kind of ripped off that line for the title of this book.
Oh, so okay. So this is a nice play on, what he loves is running. So he's going to talk about what he loves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
And so he's known as a novelist. I've actually not read any of his novels. But he's a Japanese writer. He's 69 years old, so it's still going strong. But I would like to read. I'm going to add one of his novels to my list next year, and he also has another nonfiction book about music that looks really, really interesting. But he's known as a writer, and he's also known as a runner. And so this book, and what I went into this book knowing, was that part of it dealt with his preparation for running the New York City Marathon. So it's him talking about the training and that sort of thing. But the book went way beyond that as well, and it talked a lot about his writing. So that was really interesting, and he connects his writing and his running very closely, to where he says if he was not a runner, he probably wouldn't be a writer, and then vice versa.
Two things that most people would find tortuous, right?
Yeah.
that he associates and says, well, if I didn't do the one, I wouldn't do the other. So
yeah. Well, and they both kind of came about at the same time. So he, when he was young, he started a restaurant, and the restaurant, it seems to have done pretty well, but he just came to the point where, he's working till 4 or 5 in the morning. He's getting home, having a drink. And by the time he goes to bed, the sun's starting to rise. And the way he describes it is like one day he just decided, you know what, I'm a writer. I'm going to be a writer. And so he decided to quit the restaurant, sell the restaurant, and to become a writer. And when he did that, he had a lot of bad habits going on in his life. So one was that he was a smoker. And then once he started sitting down every day at the desk to write instead of being up and about in the restaurant, he started to get a little gut on himself. So he decided that he was going to start running. So it coincides with the time that he started writing, and that he started going out and running, and which is cool, because a good friend of mine last year started running as well, and just the act of going out and running changed a lot of things in my friend's life. Things like his diet, when he went to bed, that sort of thing, and it very similar to Haruki Murakami here, where he stopped smoking, he lost a lot of weight, he started eating better. So that was all a result of the running, and then it also just set him up in a good method to where he would be waking up. He would go to bed early, wake up early, and have that time to write, and then also get his runs in as well during the day.
When does he tend to do his runs according to this?
Yeah, he runs in the morning, gets up at 5, does a little bit of work first, and then he goes running after that.
So what kind? So I'm assuming he gets up and he writes first. That's the work he does when he's really fresh.
Yeah, and he referenced Hemingway's manner of working, to where he would leave something in mid sentence the night before.
Get yourself completely drunk.
Yeah, not that part of Hemingway. The part of Hemingway that he would end writing in the evening in mid sentence so that he could then pick it up right from there in the following day.
So he does the same thing?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that I tend not to do exactly that, but I tend to leave a few notes at the end of whatever I'm working on, okay, here's the train of thought on where I'm headed, you know, pick up with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, a few bullet points or something like that, or, you know, just some sort of preliminary paragraph that needs some serious fixing before, you know, as the first thing the next morning to get me rolling.
Well, it probably helps you sleep better too, because you know that
you've got your plan.
You've accounted for everything.
Yeah, you've got your plan for the next day.
Yeah. So one thing I really enjoyed about his descriptions of running was that he views it as an individual sport. I mean, obviously it is with running, but the way he talks about it of the goals that he set. So one quote, he says, "I'm much more interested in whether I reach the goals that I set for myself. So in this sense, long distance running is the perfect fit for a mindset like mine. In long distance running, the only opponent you have to beat is yourself, the way you used to be." And I just kept writing over and over in the margins of this book, this is me, like the way he described running and viewing it as this goal of kind of beating what you did the year before or the time you had before, knowing that you're also getting older. I related to a lot of that and just thought it was cool to see someone else write about it in that sense.
That is one of the hardest things I think about getting older in terms of, you know, physical stuff. I mean, I've got a friend who, you know, she talks about how she's in her 40s and is in the best shape she's ever been in. And, you know, I'm approaching my 40s and I'll never be I could probably do nothing but work out for the next 2 years solid and probably would still only come close. I don't know that I would still approximate what I was when I was 20. And that realization that, you know, at a certain level, you can't improve. Like you can't improve on where you've been. You can't compete with the numbers that you put up at a certain point. That's a hard thing still for me to accept.
But I think with running, it is a little different in that for a gymnast, you have to be in your teens to be at your prime. But running, you can be in your prime in your 30s. And so I think with running, it depends on what kind of running. Because if you're running more explosive stuff, if you're running 400s, you're not hitting your prime in your mid 30s or so. If you're running 100 meters, you certainly aren't. Your body's elasticity just changes, and you can't keep that. It'd be for more long distance running. But I mean, like last year, that was the most miles that I'd ever run. I was 37. So it was, for running for half my life. And that was the year that I did the most miles, did the most races, that kind of thing. So I think with running, it is a little different in that sense that you can improve.
But I mean, elite runners do fall off when they hit their 30s. Yeah. I mean, even in the distance areas, they do. And so that the closer you are to elite, the harder it is to maintain whatever level you are. And there is a certain point where you have to accept that, like, constantly getting better just stops happening. And that I still haven't really wrapped my head around that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, he does talk a lot about that, competing with yourself and so on, which I think is one of the real keys to maintaining good sanity and good shape through your life. That, you know, I think is an important thing. You've got to find ways to challenge yourself. Mm-hmm. It's just how does he? I mean, he's 69. He's not running, no matter what. He's not running as fast as he was when he was 50. Mm-hmm. Right. So how does he address that issue that, you know, he's competing against himself, but he's also competing against younger versions of himself that he knows he can't beat? How does he address that question at all?
Yeah, he does. Like, for instance, in one of the marathons, he wanted to beat 4 hours and he didn't. And he just kind of accepted it because he was still running, and he was doing his best, you know. He also took up triathlons, and so he does triathlons in the summers and then marathons in the winter. So he kind of expanded as well with swimming and biking, and so yeah, it didn't really seem to bother him. Other than just, I mean, you know, he wanted to hit a certain time, he didn't hit it, but it seemed like just the act of running was the more important thing as he continued to get older.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes some sense. I do think actually switching modalities, so switching to something like a try, where if you haven't done it, switching to something new as you get older is helpful. Right. Because you can't, you know, there is some frustration if you are, you know, an elite. I was talking, one of the students in one of my classes is a college golfer. And we were talking about how, you know, at some point he's going to be older and he's going to be pro in something other than golf. Even if he's playing, you know, even if he's making his money as a golf pro, right. You know, a teaching pro or something. At some point down the line, even if he makes the tour, whatever, he's going to hit a point where he's not going to be able to sustain the level of excellence that he's used to. And how frustrating it is to suddenly know that you've been able to hit this shot consistently all your life, you know, or for, you know, 15 years. And then all of a sudden it's just not there. And, you know, he was talking about how that he knows that realization that's coming, that day is coming, and he's not sure how he'll cope with that, whether he'll even want to play the game. Right. And but finding new goals, I think is I think that's smart. And so doing tries and that sort of thing that makes sense.
And then here's a quote I think that addresses that. He says, exerting yourself to the fullest within your individual limits. That's the essence of running, and a metaphor for life. And for me, for writing as well. So the key part there, exerting yourself to the fullest within your individual limits. So as you age, your limits are going to become more, but exerting yourself to the fullest within that's the essence of running. So I thought that was a cool quote. And another one, long distance running, more or less for better or worse, has molded me into the person I am today. And I'm hoping it will remain a part of my life for as long as possible. So he kind of, you know, he views it for the long haul, and I think he'll just keep running as much as he can.
So let's shift gears a little bit. He talks, you know, you mentioned that he starts his day by working on some writing, starts his day by working conceptually, doing all the things that a writer does, and then he goes on a run. What does he think about? And so what does he talk about when he talks about running? Well, what does he think about while he's running?
He has a great quote in there in the book where he says, "If you ask me what I think about when I'm running, I have no idea." And that rang true for me as well. I mean, I could go on a hour-long run, and my wife could be like, "So what'd you think about, or what, you know, what was going on in your head?" And it's kind of like, well, I have no idea. But he does talk about just kind of weird random memories will come back to his mind. He runs with music, so I think it's a little different. With podcasts, I'm mostly concentrating on the podcast and thinking about that. If the podcast gets boring or something, I will kind of see my mind wander. But yeah, a lot of times you just don't even really know what you're thinking about. It's just kind of taking everything in on the run. So I thought that was another just kind of funny quote, and also just something I could relate to, that he really doesn't know what he thinks about when he thinks about running.
Yeah, it sounds like actually in that case, running is something of a meditative phenomenon, right? It's an active form of meditation where you do get to sort of shut off and disconnect in different ways. And I think that actually may be the appeal of running in many cases, that as with yoga or other active body practices, you can find ways to to shut down the rational part a little bit. But again, exertion, effort, as we talked about in the last podcast, and Thinking Fast and Slow, when you're exerting a lot of bodily effort, system 2 can't really do anything anymore, right? You limit how much you can actually do with that rational, effortful part of the brain. And it sounds to me like that's what's happening to some degree with both of you, is that you hit that point where you're able to just be in the moment. And like you said before, you find that state of flow, which for me, I mean, I definitely find in other forms of working out at different points, because, you're working hard enough when you're exerting yourself hard enough, you can't really think about anything other than what you're doing right at that moment. And there is something special about something that forces you to do that. And so that's interesting to hear him say specifically, like, yeah, honestly, I don't know what I think about, because, my mind wanders or it doesn't. And it just, oftentimes it's blank. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. So let's go ahead and shift gears one more time. Who do you think, I mean, aside from just random people who like to run, who would like this book? Is this just a book for runners, or is this a book for other people in general? What's the target audience? Is there a group of people that this makes sense for outside of the obvious group of nutcases?
Yeah, I think if you're a fan of Haruki Murakami's novels, I think this could be a nice shift for you to read some of his nonfiction. You really get insight into the author's life. So not just about running, but also about writing. And then he also tells you about his first job and that sort of thing, and how it led to where he is today. So if you're a runner, you're going to love the book. If you're a writer, you're going to love this book. And if you are both, if you're a running writer or a writing runner, this book is God's gift to you, and you should just go and buy it. And it's very short.
There we go. So anything else before we wrap that you really want to get off your chest or off your feet about this book?
Yeah, a couple things. And since it's such a short book, I don't want to give away too much, because I do want our listeners to read it. But a few things that I thought were just really cool. And the first was that I'm going to start it off with a quote: "Break one of my rules and I'm bound to break many more." And his rule is no walking. And I have a very similar thing in my head of I've got a couple mantras that I have in my head when I run. And one is to never quit, but it's really that idea of walking. Walking to me is quitting when I go out to run. And I know when I go out to run, I'm not racing anybody. I'm not doing anything like that. But I know that if I quit on just an everyday run, my mind is not going to be as strong in a race when it's the hardest part of the race. My mind is not going to be as strong to keep going. So it's kind of those everyday things of running. And I loved how he talked about that and not breaking any of his rules. And to the point where at the end of the book, he says what he wants his gravestone to say is his name, the years that he was alive, writer and runner. And then at the very bottom, at least he never walked. So I loved that part of it and connected very well. Just that importance of something we've discussed from a lot of the Books of Titans books, but those daily habits and also just daily mindset and not allowing yourself to do things no matter how minor it may seem, because that can really actually end up opening you to breaking more rules.
Yeah, a little slippage.
Yep. And then the last thing is, do you want to guess the location of the first marathon that he ever ran?
Los Angeles?
No. He ran from Athens to Marathon.
Oh, you're kidding.
For the very first marathon. And it was a really funny story, because he was a runner at this point, but he had never done a marathon. And so he, as part of a magazine story that he would write, was going to write about running from Athens to Marathon. So the things that made it funny were that most people in the historic run was from Marathon to Athens. So he did it the opposite way. And then when he got there, the people that were with him, because he had like a van that traveled with him so they could take photos and give him water and that sort of thing. They said, well, you're not really going to run this, are you? And he said, yeah, why else would I be here? We said, well, and they said, well, everyone else who comes and says that they're going to run it, they don't actually run it. They ride in the van and then they write an article about it. He did it.
That is so unethical.
He did it in the worst heat. He did it like in the worst part of the year. So it was extremely hot. He started first thing in the morning so he could avoid the heat as much as possible, but he was still running in the heat of the day. And then the roads from Athens to Marathon are not, they're not like, there's not like a running trail, you are on the highway. And so he was kind of afraid he was going to get hit the whole time. And then the roads are just in bad shape. So he's worried about, tripping and all that stuff. And then Greece is not necessarily a country that is full of runners. So people are just kind of looking at him like, what in the world are you doing running the wrong direction in this heat? And he said, for them to see an Asian person doing this made it even funnier. So his first marathon was literally to run to Marathon. So
run the wrong way so run from Athens to Marathon in super heat. One of the interesting things is, of course, the marathon began with an Athenian runner. And of course, there aren't very many runners in Greece. It tells us something about the wisdom of the Greeks. I'm just going to say, we're just going to leave it at that.
I guess.
But yeah, so much interesting stuff there. You actually have gotten me to almost want to read this book, which is somewhat miraculous because of my antipathy toward distance running in general and my lack of desire to do so. Although, again, as I mentioned, due to a little bit of a hole in my overall conditioning there, I'm recognizing that I do need to get some little bit longer runs in, as much as I dislike them. So if nothing else, you've succeeded in inspiring me a little bit there. Hopefully you've done the same for some listeners out there. Once again, if you're a writer who happens to be a runner, this apparently is the book for you. Any last words here?
Well, I did have one question for you. On page 49, he says, I guess the only thing I do specifically is try not to drink so many cold drinks. And he was talking, the summer heat didn't wear me down either. I don't do anything in particular to keep my energy level up during the summer. I guess the only thing to do is not drink so many cold drinks. Do you know why he would not drink cold drinks?
Well, I could answer with the famous Bear Bryant line, you wouldn't put cold water into a hot radiator, so why would you put cold water into a warm boy, right? Into a hot boy. So, no, actually there is some, and it's been a while since I saw it, but there is some evidence that drinking fluids that are closer to room temperature or closer to the temperature that you're actually exercising in is actually more beneficial to maintaining your core temperature. It's been a while since I saw that. We can try. I can try to dig out a few of those things and look that up for the show notes. So go ahead and those of you who are listening who are interested in this, you can check the show notes for some of that. It's been a while since I saw any of that, but I do vaguely recall something along those lines. And I do know that, like in India, they don't drink cold fluids to feel cooler, to cool off in the summer. And India's got areas that are notoriously oppressively hot. Mm-hmm. And what they do in India is they drink hot tea to cool down. And actually that there were a couple, I do know that, and I saw these more recently, that there were a couple of studies that were done recently that showed that taking in the hot tea actually led to to a response physiologically to that was positive in terms of how it made a person feel and all that. Again, I don't remember the mechanisms and all this. It's been a little bit, but we'll go ahead and find that and put it in the show notes. So it's probably something connected with that. Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was some kind of main thing I didn't know there about not drinking cold drinks during the summer when you're working out. But yeah, well, good. Yeah, I mean, to conclude, I do think you would really enjoy this book, Jason, and because the point of it is more having some sort of a release. You know, if you're a writer, if you're a creative type, or you work really hard at one part of your life, having something to balance that out can actually improve both of those things. So, you know, you can read this book as him talking about running, but it could also be whatever exercise you do, or maybe it's a musical release or something to that effect. Just having some sort of a balance in your life to where both of those things can actually improve the overall of your life. And that's the big thing that comes through in this book. And it was just really cool to hear him say that he would not be the writer he is if he was not the runner he is. So yeah, I think people would really get a lot out of this book, whether you run or write or not. It's a short book. You can get through it rather quickly. And it was just a joy to read. It makes me want to read his other nonfiction, as well as start reading some of his novels as well.
I wonder if anybody runs in his novels.
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to find out. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us here today on the Books of Titans podcast. Once again, just a reminder that if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us 5-star reviews on iTunes. Let others know about the podcast. It definitely helps us out a lot. You can also follow along with us at booksoftitans.com. You can chat back and forth with us on Twitter or Instagram at Books of Titans. You can also subscribe to this podcast through pretty much any podcast manager of choice. We'll be back soon to talk about another book, which we have not yet determined which one's on the list for the next episode, but we'll be back very soon next week for one more episode in the series of the Books of Titans podcast. Thanks for listening. Keep listening, keep reading, and keep improving.
And keep thinking, fast or slow.
Real. Fast or slow.
Keep it real, fast or slow.